Bhaktivedanta Swami Hite Namani.
There was a gentleman named Lou Gottlieb who had a farm outside, I think in Sausalito, called Morning Star Ranch. And this fellow came and invited the diggers to come out there and, you know, farm it and do things like that. So I went out there to live at that farm, and I'd go back and forth to San Francisco from there. And then one day we heard that the devotees from the temple were going to come out there to the Morning Star Ranch. And Prabhupada was going to come out there. So Prabhupada was picked up by this fellow Lou Gottlieb in the city in a Volvo. And Lou told me the story that he said to Prabhupada, "Put your seatbelt on." And Prabhupada said something like, "Krishna is my seatbelt." He remembered that, he told me that story. So Prabhupada got there, and I happened to be in the garden. Just, I don't know if you can say this on tape, but it was, most of the people walked around with no clothing on or anything like that up there. I happened to be in a garden when Prabhupada arrived. I was digging potatoes in the garden there. And Lou Gottlieb brought him over, and there I was, and shook Prabhupada's hand. I was standing there, and Prabhupada did say, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm digging potatoes." He said, "No, what are you doing with your life?"
In Mauritius, well, really there were only three of us, and when Prabhupada came, I think Pushta Krishna, at that time Swami, came up from South Africa, and Harikesh came, and who was it? Back to Godhead, Bugarba, was that his name? Bhargava came, and a couple others came. So there's still only 9 of us. So we got to do, you know, all of Prabhupada's services. And one thing stands out to me, that he was taking every day a glass of carrot juice in the afternoon. And one day he asked, "How many carrots does it take to make this glass of carrot juice?" And when he heard the number of carrots it took, he said, "No more."
This was during the Rath Yatra festival in San Francisco in 1975. So Srila Prabhupada was giving a class about who is eligible for punishment, who is qualified to be punished. And he said, according to someone's mental state and the crime that he has performed, he's brought in front of the magistrate, and then he is judged. And he said that children are not punishable. And so there was a lot of devotees in the audience, and everyone cheered. Children are not punishable. And then he said, women are also not punishable. And everyone cheered even more. And then, all of a sudden, a child cried. And Bahalasva stands up and says, "Okay, all children out of the temple." And Prabhupada said, no, that's okay. Children are not punishable. So everyone laughed. And then he said, so also women are not punishable, but don't take advantage. And then also everyone laughed. And he said, children are not punishable, women are not punishable, saintly people are not punishable, and old men are not punishable, and cows are not punishable. So he said, in this assembly, no one is punishable. Everybody cheered. That's my big story.
When I first met Srila Prabhupada, I was a member of the Namahata party in Japan. And it was in 1975, I believe, and the Vrindavan temple was under construction. And we were collecting for that, and supplying Prabhupada with the funds for the construction of Vrindavan, Mayapur, and Bombay. So One time I had the opportunity, Guru Kripa Maharaj took me along with him to India to bring some Lakshmi to Srila Prabhupada. And this was cash that we had collected in Japan. So we arrived there, and it was in the probably afternoon, and we went to Srila Prabhupada's office. He was sitting behind his curved desk there. And we came in, offered our obeisances to Srila Prabhupada, and then Guru Kripa Maharaj put this briefcase with the money into on Srila Prabhupada's desk for him. And I can't remember Prabhupada exactly what happened. Prabhupada opened it or what. At some point, anyway, the amount had to be revealed. So Guru Kripa Maharaj said, "There's $108,000 in there, Srila Prabhupada." And Srila Prabhupada said, "Thank you very much. 109 would be better." So when it came to matters of Lakshmi to be engaged in Krishna's service, I think Srila Prabhupada was showing us that auspicious numbers are very auspicious, but more is even more auspicious.
One thing that I remember that was a one-liner, and I just love the way Prabhupada worded it, because sometimes he would use words or a sentence in a way that no one else spoke that way. So he said, if you chant 16 rounds daily, your deathlessness is guaranteed. So I never heard such a word, deathlessness. And I still think about that. It was such a beautiful way of saying it. So deathlessness is guaranteed.
And I came and offered my obeisances, and he's standing in a room next to his room, and he's looking at the wall, and there's really nothing on the wall, but he's asking me about the painting and asking me, what do I think about the painting? Should the painting be here? And I couldn't figure out whether he was asking me if the room should be painted, what color the paint should be, or should we put some painting on the wall? And I kept, whatever you think, Srila Prabhupada. I was trying to get out of thinking about it, like just throw it back at Prabhupada, whatever you say, Srila Prabhupada. He goes, no, not whatever I say. What do you think? What do you think? What do you want to do for Krishna? And it was a very instructive moment, and I don't even know what I said at that point, because I still didn't know what he was talking about, so it was incredibly awkward, but I didn't forget that part of it, that he was very keen on having us not just following rules and regulations, but was keen on having us think for ourselves and finding out how we could serve Krishna, and that Krishna was in our hands also, and he had given him to us, and now we were to use the best of our intelligence how to serve him.
I went on one morning walk with Srila Prabhupada, and we were going up the road from Bhaktivedanta Manor, and I kind of went to the front because I usually had to do service at the temple. So this was the one that I got to sneak out on. And Srila Prabhupada was talking about Krishna. Somebody said to Prabhupada, "Oh, Srila Prabhupada, why, we hear that in Vrindavan, they were all dressed in so many stones and jewels, and how did they do that without mining?" And then Prabhupada said, because Krishna was present. He said, then Mother Earth wanted to give. Krishna and Balaram were there, so he said the pearls would appear just in the streams and all the jewels, and they could just pick up and make their jewelry. I thought that was really nice.
This particular event took place in his room, and again, a room conversation. And I was sitting really close to Prabhupada. It was right just 2 feet in front of him. And Prabhupada was sitting on the floor very casually with his knee up like he does sometimes, and looking so relaxed and peaceful and angelic. And right next to him was a Vyasa-san. But Prabhupada was sitting on the floor right next to the Vyasa-san. I didn't really take notice of it so much, But the reporters were coming in, and they were going to ask some questions. And they were asking about Prabhupada's cars, and why do you have so many cars? And Prabhupada gave his answers to those questions. And finally, this reporter said, "Why aren't you sitting on that big seat?" Like that, really antagonistic, you know. "Why aren't you sitting on that big seat?" And Prabhupada looked right at her and he said, "Because you would be envious." Boom. That was that. Didn't pull any punches at all, just because you would be envious. And then I realized that we have to keep ourselves humble and simple. We should also live simply. And Prabhupada always did all of his teaching from the ground level. He didn't have a big fancy desk with a big slab of glass on top, like we find nowadays so much these days. We cannot make ourselves artificially important. Either we're important or we're not important. You can't artificially prop it up with some... Anyway, so Prabhupada was teaching like that as soon as you put yourself in some opulence, that immediately it creates envy. It doesn't create respect, it creates envy. And so, another very, very strong lesson right there, and which should be considered every time we think that we're important. Because Prabhupada always remained the most perfect, humble person throughout everything, whenever he did anything. The most brilliant, articulate, celestial being that ever came to this dark planet.
So as we're walking in, we're sitting down, and to try to help Srila Prabhupada remember our conversations earlier, I said, "Srila Prabhupada, when I used to speak with you in 1966, I was very crazy." And when Srila Prabhupada heard this, he raised his eyebrows and looked me right in the eye and said, "Oh, are you still crazy?" He said it just like that. We heard different memories of Prabhupada showing how he could be so humorous. And he was teasing me. And it's like to make a crazy person become even crazier in a sense. Anyway, we sat down. He asked me, "What are you doing? What is your situation?" And I explained. I explained it in such a way as to try to convince Srila Prabhupada that I was no longer crazy. So in order to convince him I was no longer crazy, I said, "I have 2 trucks. I have a business. I have a wife. I have an apartment." And I was thinking, if you have all these things and people, then you're not crazy. You know, I just thought that this is a sign that I wasn't crazy and Prabhupada would be impressed by all this. And he said, "That's okay. You don't have to move in the temple. Stay with your wife. Do your business. I only ask one thing of you. Simply try to understand Krishna." And that was a personal instruction. And I definitely offered my obeisances at this point. I got to that, I advanced up to that level. And as I was walking out, there was one other somewhat cryptic instruction where Srila Prabhupada, the last words I heard directly from Srila Prabhupada were, "And we are not asking for any money." And that was the last I heard from Srila Prabhupada.
There is a darshan I also remember in Mayapur in his room. And Sudama Swami came in, and Siddha Swarup at that time, Maharaj, came in. Siddha Swarup was like effulgent as far as I was concerned. He was really interesting person. But there was some, I don't know, I'll say politics, going on between him and some of the bigger other sannyasis, GPC, whatever. And so when he came in the room, Prabhupada turned to Siddha Swarup and said, "So Siddha Swarup Maharaj, I understand that you have a different philosophy than we do." And Siddha Swarup, "Oh, Prabhupada," he said, "Isn't it, Sudama?" Sudama kind of hangs his head. I don't want to get involved in this. And then Siddha Swarup said, "Well, Prabhupada, sometimes I preach to the householders that they should live outside the temple and have their own independent thing." And Prabhupada said, "Yes, that's a very good idea. That's a good idea." And then he said, Siddha Swarup said, Prabhupada, you know, sometimes I just don't feel qualified. Prabhupada cut him off. And he said, qualified or unqualified, I love you. I was like, the way you said it was just, and I'd never met Siddha Swarup before, and then I talked to him privately later and heard a little bit about some of the stuff, but I just thought that was just the most liberal and affectionate statement that could come out of anybody's mouth, especially such an elevated personality. Qualified or unqualified, I love you.
Then I remember when Srila Prabhupada left, we were in Los Angeles, and there was a big, big celebration. Devotees were totally confused, but we somehow or another put on a huge celebration that went on all day long. And at that time also my parents had come to the temple. Somehow or another they came from New York to visit at that time. And my mother was in the temple all day through all of the festivities and stood and just watched the whole thing. And when my father heard that Prabhupada had left, he said, oh, the old man died? And Prabhupada affected everybody so deeply. His kindness is the kindness of Krishna. He saw the soul in all living beings. Everybody, all his disciples have felt that glance of Srila Prabhupada that just pierces through all of the anartas and bodily identification. So his kindness is what carries us all. And hopefully it will carry us all back to his lotus feet. Thank you.
Je anilo premadana koruna prachu